Hello and welcome to the Zero to Traction podcast, a podcast about how first-time founders create companies that scale. Of course, I'm one of your regular co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, here with my other regular co-host. You know him by many, many nicknames, some of them kind. Cameron Law. Cameron, hello.
Hello. Good to be back in the studio here and always excited for our conversation. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to diving in and supporting some founders with our next episode here.
Yeah, me too. We got something good to talk about today. It's not. This is the problem with this kind of thing, is that this is the thing that doesn't sound sexy, right? We're going to talk about milestones, and it seems like one of those really boring, kind of lame things to talk about. Everybody wants to talk about how do I get more sales and how do I do this, and it's like, well, you're doing that for something, right? And if you're not, then you're doing it wrong, right? So you're probably wasting time, or at least you're wandering aimlessly. So if you're not wandering aimlessly, then you have an aim, and that aim is a milestone. And so it's really important to understand where those come from, how those work in an early stage startup, how you go about the process of setting those, and how that affects all of the decisions that you have to make along the way. So we're going to be talking all about milestones today in an episode that we are calling the Pack It Up, Pivot, or Persevere edition.
Say it faster. I think you should say it on the actual JDM, times two. See how fast.
I should say it on my 1.75 speed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are covering all of that and more in an episode that we are calling the Pack It Up, Pivot, or Persevere edition of the podcast.
Nailed it.
There you go. I got it. I was really worried about it. Cameron and I were talking before we started recording that I was going to botch that. Okay, so there's a lot of different directions that we can take this idea of milestones, and I think maybe it would be helpful just to kind of throw all of those out on the table, and then we probably don't have time to cover all of them, but we can pick some of them up. So there's a few different things that come to mind. So and then you make your mess, and we'll go from there.
Perfect.
So one thing comes to mind is that when I think of milestones, there's two principal things I think of. One that I think of is, how you choose to expend your own effort. And how do you know if you're on the right track? And how do you know when it's appropriate and not to expend more time, more effort, more money, more resources? Whether you're doing that as a founder, doing that as an investor, you're doing that as a studio, or anything else. And the second thing that comes to mind is that I think more maybe it's like specific tactically, the milestone is what appears on your ask slide, right? And your use of funds slide. What you're doing is saying, give me X dollars so that in Y time frame I can get to Z, right? Like that's what you're saying. And so the Y and the Z part of that is a milestone. You're saying this, and it might not be the first milestone, it might be 2 or 3 milestones away, but like it's still, this is like where we're heading, and we just need your cash to help us get there. So that's where those are the two things that come to mind. What comes to mind for you?
Well, I love that last component there. It's kind of the proof points of the evidence that you're gaining. I think, tied to that is it also is related to the risks that are still seen in your business, right? So as you're setting those milestones, coming in from an outside perspective, what is that riskiest component that either you yourself need to invest to get to that next proof point to say I should continue on, or pack it up, or pivot, or persevere, right? It'll lead to that decision point based on action towards that specific milestone. And then same for an investor, right? And so I think partly looking at it from that framework of what is the riskiest assumption that I have, and then how do I take action to hit that milestone that then will allow me to ultimately double down or take a different, visual. And so I think, to one component that you mentioned is it tied to the ask slide. I think that's one of the biggest misses is most of the times people put it towards the use of funds. Was like, what are you using the funds to go achieve next, right? And so I think there's underlying this, ultimately ties to kind of really the think ethos of our podcast here is really about the cycles and gaining evidence related to that. And it ultimately is like, if you set the wrong milestone related to risks or all of those things, right, you might be gaining a proof point, but is that actually like a proof point that demonstrates that you should continue to double down as well? So that would be the extra mess that I might add, is like some of the mindset going into that tied to our riskiest assumptions.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to take it. I think you're right. And like, just to kind of underline a little bit, or zoom in on the problem that you identified that a lot of pitches have, is that they'll say like, we want 750, for the seed round, and 750,000 for the seed round, and we're gonna, our use of funds is, we're gonna hire, the salesperson, we're gonna hire a new, these two developers, and we're gonna spend some dollars on marketing, and that's gonna last, us 6 months. And I'm like, but why though? But like, with why those people? And maybe it's evident from the roadmap, for example. Like, it might be like, you might be pointing in the right direction. Maybe it's like clear what they'll be doing, maybe. But why 6 months? Like, what does that get you? Like, having these people for 6 months, what does that actually get you? And I like the term you used before, Cameron. You said a proof point. And I think that's actually a really good way to phrase that. I often call it like an inflection point, which, maybe a little bit more lofty. But what we're really looking at is like, we're saying that you're heading to this, big, scalable, massive place. And if you get this money, you're going to get to a point where you can provide additional proof that that's all real, and that that's all happening right now, that you'll be on this track. So I think that's like just a really great way to phrase this. Like, how do you, like, what is the proof point that you're going after? And I think like one of the things that is commonly a mistake in, not in what's literally on the slide, but in our strategy in going what's on the slide, is thinking about fundraising as something about needing cash. Like, my startup needs money, our runway is 1 month or whatever. And, we're trying, our new sales aren't likely to cover that. So we're going to go raise some capital to stay in business. And I don't like, that's not a very valuable or interesting proposition to somebody who's putting money in the company. It's just not. And instead, like, you should be thinking about, here's our path to growth, here's our go to market, or here's the next iteration of our marketing and sales strategy, or next iteration of product, or whatever it is. Like, this is the next thing, and this is how we're going to get there. But that, like, and I think that is actually the broader lesson, that it doesn't matter if you're raising capital or not, really. Because at the end of the day, like, and the reason the investors need that proof point, right, to know that you're on the right track, and, just to provide evidence that what they're putting into your company is likely to pan out, or is worth the risk of panning out. So if you as a founder are putting in all this time, all this energy, all of this money, opportunity costs, social capital, energy, like everything else that you're putting into that, shouldn't you also be saying, like, where's my proof point, just to know that I'm on the right track? Like, I don't, wouldn't you be looking at the same thing for all the things you're dumping into the company?
I would hope so and think so, but I don't know that that's necessarily always the case. And I think, part of, as we're thinking of these different proof points, right, is it demonstrates that kind of pathway for future rounds, right? And I know we're kind of gearing this more towards, scalable technology companies that are, venture backable, right? But it was like, here's a proof point that I'm seeking in the next 12 months. And once I hit that, the next round of investment will get me to that next proof point related to it, right? And so it tells that theory and that ultimate pathway that you're making for those subsequent rounds, which, if you're taking the lens of an investor, they're seeing that tie to like, oh, well, I see, at this point, you're not only generating revenue, but you're, clearly engaging your early adopters to then now translate to the next part of the market, or whatever that might be, and that you're using the capital to grow in an intentional way. And so I think that that's a super key element. And as you're like telling the story of your venture, right, you're demonstrating the traction points, right, that customer buying behavior that then demonstrates, okay, here's the next major milestone within that space. So is it, expanding to a different geography, or adding a new component to your overall, product or service, whatever that might be, but tying that together and demonstrating that through your particular story. But I think it ultimately ties to, like, I think overall a lot of these things is like what, taking on the lens of, either yourself and taking a step back from the business. What is that next point that, like, okay, I need to, uh, I'm going to double down my time in this. And that could be earlier stages where, you're doing the customer discovery, and did you hit a validation point? Like, okay, now I'm going to double down and spend some money to build a prototype or an MVP, right? And then once you hit a milestone of it actually, looking like there's a minimum viable audience that actually can get value from this, MVP that you've created, now you can double down and maybe seek additional investment outside of your time and energy. And so it's really thinking through that intentionality with, one, what is the risk that I need to validate? And then when I hit some level of evidence, that could be validation or invalidation, that's where you kind of go back to the drawing board. Was it, was I just a little bit off and maybe need to do something different? Or was I completely off and, it's time to pack it up? Or, you know what, we're right there. We just need to persevere, and we need additional capital to do so. And I think when you think of that, of like getting to that decision point, having that intentionality of what the milestone was, what was the actual test that you were running to get to that element of proof point. One maybe question to you, JDM, like what frameworks or tools, and I know we like try to stay away just from like teaching tools for tools' sake, but like how might that look like in practice, to tie some of these kind of concept of cycles and experimenting to here's the next milestone in raising capital?
Yeah, I think rather than a tool, I'll give a
Yeah,
framework. I
perfect. Yeah.
think would be helpful here. I actually don't know of any amazing tools to do this, and that's because I think startups are so varied. There's little things here and there that might help. I don't remember what Ash Moria calls it, that pirate metrics
Mhm.
based tool that he has as
Customer
part of Lean
factory
Stack.
blueprint. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the customer factory blueprint. So that that's a great tool in, when you're trying to ask certain questions. And so there are tools out there, but the general answer I think for this is a framework, and it's a framework that in the startup world we call innovation accounting. And the basic idea of innovation accounting is that it's a framework to help startups measure progress by measuring what matters. And what matters is tied to uncertainty, because uncertainty is where we find risk, right? Uncertainty and impact is what makes risk. Risky things are the ones that are really uncertain and really impactful, right? That's where we find the risk. And so the idea behind innovation accounting, I'm kind of air quoting that, is that it's contrasting it with, say, financial accounting, like the traditional kind of accounting, where you're looking at stuff that you can find on the balance sheet. Maybe you're looking at ROI, or you're looking at gross sales, or market share, or something like that. And you are after those, eventually. But when you're in the early stages, idea stage, pre-seed stage, seed stage, like even into Series A, those metrics they're functionally zero, right? They're not really that interesting. They don't really help you with much. And even if they did, they would tell you today if you were successful yesterday, but they don't tell you if you're going to be successful tomorrow. And when we're looking at innovating and doing something different for the future, like when we're trying to build a thing that isn't a thing yet, what we're much more interested in is not measuring yesterday's success, but measuring the potential for tomorrow's success. That's where innovation accounting comes in. And so it's a couple of different principles that'll just kind of tease out really quickly here, and then we can get more specific. So one is about measuring what matters. And so that's where we look at actionable metrics that are actually affecting real customer behavior, right? So we're not measuring like the money that they did. We're talking about customer behavior. Customer behavior is how we measure our progress relative to product market fit. Okay. So that's one thing. The second thing is that it's about facilitating what in the lean startup methodology we call validated learning, where we have an hypothesis, we go through the build, measure, learn loop, get data back and validate that this thing was true. That additional data therefore decreases uncertainty, and by decreasing uncertainty, we decrease risk, right? That's the process. So focuses on that. It also, tying it to this conversation, it guides our investment decisions. So we're able to look at the data that we're getting back with the measurements that we're doing, and actually provides that reasonable data to assess progress. One of the things that I think I've ranted about on the podcast before is the idea that we sometimes measure the wrong things with our investors. And so then we tell our investors like, oh, we're going to hit this sales figure, in 6 months or in 12 months. And everybody knows it's bullshit. Like when you say it, like the investors know, everybody knows you pulled it out of your ass. But somehow what happens between the time that you said that and everybody knew it was, licking your finger and holding it up in the air at the golf course, right? Everybody knew it was that, but sometime between then when you said it to when you go and report on it, that gets forgotten and it becomes the metric that you said. And now it's, why didn't you hit that number? And that's not the right conversation because it was the wrong metric to begin with, right? So if we actually start looking at the milestone that we really do want to hit, about looking at customer behavior that's signaling us toward product market fit, that can guide much better investment decisions, whether they're investment decisions from our external investors or from us as founders. So validated learning. I mentioned doing metrics that matter, and this idea of actionable metrics. And I want to contrast that with what we often call vanity metrics. So vanity metrics are the numbers that like they look impressive on the page, but don't really signal anything. I see this all the time. This is when you see a startup talking about the number of downloads they have of their mobile app, and it's like, who cares? Are they using it? How often are they using it? Are they coming back? Like, it's just it's a metric that that just doesn't give you a lot, right? Because you're looking at downloads and not engagement. Product market fit isn't found in downloads, it's found in engagement. So because you can always tweak the ability to get people into the app, but if they're not using it, your product's shit, right? Like that's just the way it is at the end of the day. So the process, and I'll just say this at a high level so that I can stop the long tirade here, but is you start by saying like, this is the thing that we think is the greatest predictor of tomorrow's success. Like if we were to have this chain of leading indicators leading to market domination, world domination, whatever it is, or leading to product market fit, and we reverse engineer, like we need to hit this thing, then we're gonna hit that thing, then we're gonna hit this other thing, and like that first chain that's the thing. So we go, that's the thing we want to measure. We establish a baseline. We start measuring it. We run those little experiments, do those cycles, like you were saying before, Cameron, like you gotta do little cycles, run those experiments, tune the engine, right? As you're going through, to keep optimizing toward that until you get to the title of our episode here, the pack it up or pack it in. Did we say pack it in or pack it up? The
Either way,
the pack it, I don't know, pack it in, pivot, or persevere moment, right? And that's the point where you get to that. So I'm gonna pause there. If there's any threads you want to pull at.
Yeah, no, I think just reiterating I think the one that stands out is the vanity metrics versus the metrics that matter. And the example that comes to mind, just because I've seen it in like the North Star metric kind of framework, which I think is similar to a degree, but is Spotify, right? So thinking of like Spotify has a lagging indicator of like premium subscriptions, right? Like that's a sales metric of people that are actually signing up and paying Spotify for the value that they're creating. And I think just a quick point is like a lot of these metrics that matter tie to understanding, is there value creation taking place? Like the fact that someone's downloading something doesn't mean that they're getting value from it. And so are you able to demonstrate what that proof point is? So in the case of Spotify, it's actually, are there like the hours that someone is listening is an indicator that they're likely to become a premium subscriber, because if you listen over a certain amount, you're probably tired of hearing the advertisements, right? And so thinking of those types of things, that those are leading indicators, and that will allow you to see, oh, can I double down on this metric in terms of getting people to listen more, or that they're having a good experience in that then will convert into ultimately them becoming a paid subscriber or user. And so it's really thinking of, as we're looking at this innovation accounting, is like, what's the pathway to value creation? Like, yes, there's indicators like within your, I would go to like pirate metrics of like, are you able to get someone to your landing page to then download? So that at some point is a good data point that your funnel to getting them there is key. But then once they're downloading it, the next key element that you need to be looking at is, are they getting value from whatever it is that you've ultimately sold them on in terms of your value proposition. And so just tying some of those dots, and I think that Spotify one is a good example, because oftentimes it's like, oh, well, what's the key metric that matters? It was like, oh, that they have premium subscribers. Well, that's lagging. Like, what was the value that indicated that that was going to ultimately take place? And so that's kind of where,
Yeah.
I think your example of like pitching to investors, if you're pitching, the metric that matters is sales, at the end of the day, revenue is key, but it's how can you build that repeatable model, right? And if you don't have that repeatable model, then the investment that you're getting won't necessarily allow you to continue to grow that sales. It's much more manual in the way that maybe you were originally approaching it. And so those are just some of the connections and dots I wanted to connect there.
Yeah, I love the Spotify example because like the metric that is going to matter for them, right? Like we are saying before, it's going to be engagement, which for them is spins, right? That's what the record industry calls even digital plays. They call them spins from the old like record spins, right? Well, yeah, exactly. Record scratch. But so that's the metric that you're probably looking at, because if they're not listening, like it doesn't matter how many emails you send them talking about how amazing your premium subscription pricing is, if they're not even listening. Like it's gonna like you're just literally marketing to the wrong people. And so like you have to like look at, can I get people to come back? And like what is our, like maybe it's something like the like spins per customer. Like maybe that's the metric that we're looking at. How can we drive up spins per customer? Because even if it doesn't result in premium membership, it does result in more ad inventory, and that's valuable to us as well. So like it guides, in addition to just guiding our decision making, which is important, it guides our just day-to-day behavior about how we think about the business itself. And so even when you reach the point where the sales figure is what matters, like let's say you're looking at, raising a substantive Series A or Series B, and you're looking at your revenue month over month, and it should double, triple, right? And so you're looking at like that growth. That growth is guided by some of these other metrics too. And so it's like those things don't go away.
Love it.
Yeah. So that's like I think to kind of wiggle back around, we didn't actually talk too much about like what do you do with that data that comes back, like what we said it's pack it in, pivot or persevere. And I think those are the three choices we often like talk about as a pivot or persevere. And I think it would be a mistake to leave that to your gut, which I think is what a lot of people do. They're like, maybe if I give it another week, maybe if I give it another month. And what we're doing is allowing our motivated reasoning to get in the way of our actual reasoning. And so the question that you need to ask is, I'm thinking that this is my hypothesis. This is the signal that we're on the right track. This is a signal of success. This is exactly what it looks like to measure it. Here's how I know if I'm right or wrong. And then you go and measure it, and you get data back. And now you got that data back, and now you analyze it. And it could be that you have insufficient data, that there could be an experimental problem. You could have invalidated an assumption that went into this experimental design. And so you have to do it again, and they have to decide, is it worth doing again? And like, that's all very real. So like I'm not going to say that every time you get data back, it's going to be necessarily super clear, but what you want to avoid is it being unclear because you had a definitional problem, right? Like if you're saying we're going to measure spins per customer, right? That's pretty clear. But if you say we want to measure, are people using the app? Like that's not like, what does that mean? I don't know. And so then you're going to end up like, you can again let your motivated reasoning sink in and kind of wiggle around until you find that one little metric that makes sense. It's like when the election was last week, right? And so you get everybody's looking for like reading the tea leaves to like know what the result's going to be. And so they're like, we see like it was pretty clear fairly early on, for example, in the evening, what the result was likely to be, right? From a pure data perspective, like one of the two likely outcomes became considerably more likely early in the evening. Not certainty, but considerably more likely. But then what everybody's doing is like, nobody wants like that. The losing side of any of those battles never wants to believe that, right? Why would you? And so instead they look for like little things. Oh, well, if I just look at the exit polls in this one little county here, I see this different signal. And I think that this is why I think that applies everywhere. And that's motivated reasoning. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily wrong, but you weren't sound to conclude a broader conclusion than other than this low quality early data that you saw in one like tiny little county. And so we can do the same thing here, is that we'll end up looking at all of the ways we can measure engagement, find something that looks positive and go, well, obviously that's a signal that we're on the right track. But if that's why you need to in advance say like, we're looking at spins per customer. That's what we're looking at.
Well, that made me think about kind of like shiny object syndrome, because I find that oftentimes, I think, that's something that we haven't chatted about here, was when you set the milestones, it kind of removes the like, oh, well, like, hey, this is really interesting, but it's not really your core like thing you need to be focusing on, because like, people are excited about, maybe whatever you're building, and there's some tangential way that would support them, but it's not your customer. It's something, maybe it's a research opportunity or it's a partnership, but takes you away from your core milestone. And when you know where you're headed and what's going to hit that next milestone for you to either invest more time and resources yourself, or to raise that next round, or ultimately, achieve the milestone that you raised a round on, you have that more intentionality versus kind of like, oh, someone, hey, said there's this opportunity, not really in your realm, or it's not going to drive the core metric that matters. And so it allows you to kind of stay focused and also give you that language to say, hey, I'm really excited about the opportunity that you presented. This is what I'm corely focused on. Is there a way that maybe aligns? If not, then let's put that on our roadmap for the future once I hit this milestone. And so I think it'll allow you to like anchor and kind of what you're doing. And I think that sometimes that spinning the wheel aimlessly in a way, and like, oh, this opportunity could happen, is not tied to like being grounded in like what you actually need to achieve next. So just, I think another benefit of like setting these milestones, and, one of the things maybe we could come back to is, as you think about setting milestones, like what would it look like to, proportion more investment or resources to that type of effort. So say from like, okay, I'm I'm raising that seed round, like what would adding additional investment of your own resources, or like, is that expanding your team? Like, what does that look like from your lens, JDM?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the way that founders should be framing the question to themselves, honestly, and like just a brief note on, what you were talking about this, the lens of milestones, create focus for us, and it like creates it can help with shiny objects in them. Just to connect back to some of our prior conversations, that also is where accountability comes from. Not only self accountability, but the accountability for our advisors, from our board of advisors, from eventually our board of directors, where we're telling them this is the thing that matters, and this is what it means for it to matter. This is why it matters, and here's how we're measuring it. Because what often happens is, founder comes back, it's been a month or 2 months or something like that, and they're talking about something completely different. And now you have this group of people who are going to, but you said this is what mattered like last time we talked, and you haven't talked about that at all now. And is that because that no longer matters, or are we off track, or what? And a lot of founders will say exactly what you just said. Well, this opportunity looked interesting, and so I ended up, and it's like, and then you end up nowhere. You're spinning your wheels because you're just going after everything that moves. So I think like that the question of, how we identify the right thing to measure for us is the like important question for every founder to be thinking through, because it's really going to not only guide your own behavior, but it's going to guide how investors, advisors, and everybody else is seeing you and is seeing your relative success in the market. Is going to be based on how you define it. So you get to define what that success looks like. And I don't mean that from a way to manipulate it, because you're working with smart people and they're going to see right through bullshit. But you can define what, like, that we have this theory of how we're going to get to market. And that theory is dependent on these few things. And that theory is where I would personally first search for what that measurement is. Here's an example. So like, let's say you're doing your early stage, maybe pre-seed-ish, leading into seed, product and market, kind of sort of. You've got some early users, it's fine. Maybe they're paying customers, maybe they're not. Doesn't really matter for this illustration. And so you're saying, all right, our next big play is, we have this go-to-market strategy, and we think we're going to reach customers on this particular channel with this kind of message, this particular way. And we think that's going to pencil out because of these things, and we're going to need some cash to do that. But like, this is our go-to-market theory. Then what we're measuring is not the success of the go-to-market, right? Because that's like 5 steps in the future. Like 5 things have to go right in order for us to get there. And it's what's the first thing in that path to market. So if your roadmap, if your go-to-market like path, if your strategy for go-to-market involves a particular channel, then one of the first measures of success is, can you even find people on that channel? Like, how do you know that they're there, and how do you know that message is going to resonate? That's going all the way back to you mentioned pirate metrics before, and like, what's the earliest measurement in that chain of acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, referral, where you don't have robust data, where you don't have proof that theory, that particular go-to-market theory works, and that's probably where you need to measure. And oftentimes we talk about go-to-market in really linear terms because it's easier to talk about it that way. Like, I have a SaaS app, I charge X dollars a month for a SaaS app, and I'm going to find my early customers on this platform, and I just have to get in front of them on that platform. There, acquisition, activation, revenue, all done, boom. And sometimes it is like that, particularly with SaaS. But sometimes it's not. And sometimes you have these complicated, mechanisms. Maybe you're doing a marketplace of some kind, multi-sided thing. And it's not as simple as person A is paying, let me go find person A and put an ad in front of them. Sometimes you have to do this circuitous work in order to get person A to pay. And so in that case, you might be looking at something that is a little bit harder to define. And that's where you get the more interesting metrics. And this is where I would go back to one that's maybe in the middle of the two, which would be the Spotify example, where like nowhere in your go-to-market, quote unquote, is that spins per user, right? That metric isn't found in there anywhere. Isn't part of it. But what is part of it is that you get people to come back, because they're never going to pay a recurring monthly fee if they're not coming back and engaging with the platform. So that's our measure. That's a measure that we're using, an engagement measure, like a retention-ish measure, an activation-ish measure, right? It's in that space where we're looking at that thing. And so it's not necessarily, it's sort of linear, but not really, right? Because it's not on the path of like, they came here, they signed up, then they paid, right? It's something in between that we're using to figure out their likelihood, like what is their propensity to pay eventually. But it might be different if you're doing something where you have a multi-sided market, where you now need to figure out like, how do I get, actually, let's do Spotify, but let's pretend that they didn't have the premium model and it was all ad-based. You're not getting ads on day one. Not happening, right? Like, that's just not going to be a thing. And so you might have some alternative means of early stage financing, of the product. Maybe you do a different way, like a different kind of advertising for something like that, or maybe you do something completely different, or maybe you just run in the red for a while, and that's just what you have to do in order to like build a user base. That's less popular these days, but that's certainly how Spotify did it, and how a lot of like social media platforms did it. Then you're looking at like, well, it's not about like, can I get advertisers on board? It's about, can I get sufficient inventory for advertisers, right? Because I know that in order to sell the advertisers, I have to sell them that I have the inventory of these particular users. And you're probably looking at 2 different things. It's probably the raw inventory of like, this is the number of spins per user, and our model is an ad after every X spins. Right. So that unit measure that. But then the second part of it is like, how valuable is that inventory? What do we know about the person who's actually listening to that? Because the more we know about them, the greater the value of that placement is. Do you know their age? Do you know like what can we glean from the kind of music they listen to? Or have they connected with did they log in with Facebook or something like that? And so we know their age or whatever it is. And so then you might also be looking at the measurement of like, how specific, like what are the kinds of cohorts that we can define in that. You might have a metric in there too. So it can be kind of like it can be kind of hard sometimes.
Well, I mean, a lot of it goes back to like, I mean, for me, it's ultimately core is like where the value creation's taking place, right? And so, if you add more advertising, it takes away from the user's experience of value, right? And so you kind of have to balance those two different things. And in terms of the data to be more valuable to advertisers, right? There's things that they need to build into the solution to maybe capture more data if they don't have that, right? Maybe like understanding, oh, you can build playlists and the playlist signal a certain thing based on the types of songs that they're putting in. And so all of that goes into the solution and how that value is ultimately created. And so it's not just building feature for feature's sake, but what's the value that's driving either for the user or the customer. And so tying that together is a really key element to it. So it's not just building to build, right? It's really being intentional of like, this is going to drive more value, which, either gives us more user data or has a better user experience. So they're getting more spins that then therefore allows us to have more inventory, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's great. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for this episode. So before we head into our usual frivolity, next week is Global Entrepreneurship Week. Cameron, you basically run GEW for us in the Sacramento region. I know you have helped. There's other people. I get that you're not a one-man show, but
It's a team.
you're the spearhead.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're the tip of the spear. Tell us about GEW this
Yeah,
year.
awesome. Well, thanks for the opportunity to do a quick pitch. We're really excited about the week ahead. So, GEW takes place November 18th through the 22nd. We're joining an international celebration of the role entrepreneurship plays in building our communities. And so, we'd love for you to come out in the Sacramento region. We do have some signature events that I'd quickly highlight. One on Monday, November 18th, we have our Sacramento Entrepreneurial State of the Union, but really talking about what's going on in our innovation and entrepreneurial economy. We have two awesome keynote fireside chat speakers. That's Director Tara Lynn Gray of the California Office of the Small Business Advocate, who's funded our Accelerate California initiative here in the region. And then we also have Victor Huang, who is the founder and CEO of Right to Start. And really great discussion we'll have around kind of building thriving regions through entrepreneurial activity. And then we'll dive into our specific innovation clusters. So food and ag, health and life science, and then clean tech and zero emission vehicles. So if you want to learn what's going on in our region, particularly around innovation and entrepreneurship, would love for you to join us at the Carlson Center. We always have our startup happy hour on Tuesday, so come join us. And we have a panel of early stage founders who will share their experience in leveraging resources, but also getting to their traction points on their venture. And then Wednesday is a full day at the Carlson Center. So we kick off with 1MC. If you don't know 1MC, that's 1 million cups. And we have a couple people presenting. We'll head straight into the mentor sprint. So I think JDM, you'll be a mentor for that. So if you want to come get shredded, join us then. But no, it's a great 15-minute. Every 15 minutes, we rotate the entrepreneurs who basically go speak with new mentors and get feedback on their business. And then quickly following that, we'll be having our session here, the Zero to Traction podcast live. And we want to hear your burning questions. So come ask us questions live and we'll dive into your pressing concerns. But we'll be capping that day off up in Rockland for the NorCal AngelCon, where we'll have 4 startups that will be competing for $115,000 in capital. 10,000 of that is up to you as an audience to decide. So we'll have a audience award. So we'd love for you to join us and place your vote for your favorite startup that will be presenting that night. So outside of that, there's a lot of other events. So just type in Carlson Center, GEW SAC. GEW is Global Entrepreneurship Week, and would love for you to plug in. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes for that. And so for our non-local listeners, we have plenty of people from outside the Sacramento area, of course. Hello to all of you who aren't local. Hello to all of our international listeners as well. As Cameron mentioned, GEW is an international thing. So if you're not here in Sacramento next week, check out wherever you are. There's probably something happening somewhere near you that can talk about, entrepreneurship as a driver of economic growth, and how we support local entrepreneurs and everything else going on. So it's a rip roaring good time. Live episode of the podcast we're going to do next week. So next week's show will not land at the same time it normally does. It's going to land later in the week because we're recording live on Wednesday for Global Entrepreneurship Week. It's going to be super fun. So with that, do you have any?
I was just going to say, we will have them streaming on LinkedIn Live. So if you're not in the region, feel free to hop on to LinkedIn, and we'll be streaming them there. So you can watch and engage in the conversation there.
Oh, awesome. I will put the link to it'll be on the Carlson Center's page,
correct,
right?
Yep.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes as well. So check out, follow the Carlson Center. They also post a bunch of other like really helpful things on LinkedIn anyway, so you might as well just follow them because all the cool kids do. And with that, that's the end of our show today. But of course, this would not be an episode of Zero to Traction if we were not distracted in our search for traction by frivolity. So, what you got?
So yeah, I guess my frivolous thought, like what's been, what's the saying you have, the craw, or I can't remember however you position the, whatever it's called. But nonetheless, what I'm thinking of is, as I've shared in past episodes, I've been training.
Oh, stuck in my craw?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's stuck in your craw?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I don't remember what the saying was. So you can cut this out if you need be, but maybe people will like me struggling for words on that. But I've been training for the CIM, and I'm less than a month out, and I'm wearing my, I think probably my fourth or fifth pair of shoes to the bone right now. And I went to go buy the next pair of them, but they no longer sell that version. They only sell the newest version. So I'm going to have to try out these new shoes that are different in the way that they're laid out. And so, I'm wearing my New Balance, but I'm a little frustrated that they don't sell the same shoe anymore. I even loaded up on them knowing that they might be selling out. And so I'm going to have to get a whole new newest version, same price. So that's okay. But it'll be a whole new feel, and I'm a little frustrated about that. So I'll have to test these out and see if they are as good as the other ones. So.
Yeah, because you only have a month left, right?
Yeah, December 8th is the big day, and yesterday it was called Run the Parkway, so it was our longest run before, so it was a 20-miler, and so I'm feeling ready.
Awesome. Well, my frivolity is something a little bit frustrating as well. So I have in my home kitchen a cooktop. And a gas cooktop, and one of the burners has decided it will no longer function, and it's not an old one, but appliances, particularly kitchen appliances, are not very reliable, and yay. And so it's probably fixable, but it's a cooktop, and so rather than going down that particular route, we're trying to replace it, and we're trying to replace it before Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. Because that's like 2 weeks away, and we always have family over for Thanksgiving, and my wife and I do like to cook and all that. So our front power burner is not the one we really want to be gone for this. So trying to find a new one, and as it turns out, so the one that we like, it's a professional one, professional, like prosumer, I think would be the term we would use in electronics, but I don't think they call it a professional one, but it's it's a prosumer one, and from Wolf, and it's got the nice red restaurant style knobs, and really good stainless steel and easily cleanable grates and all that stuff. So it's got the features, but as it turns out, you can't just buy it on Amazon. You can't just buy it from Best Buy or Home Depot or Lowe's or anything like that. They go through showrooms, because it's prosumer. They go through all these showrooms, and the showrooms all have agreements from the manufacturers that says they will not ship more than 150 miles from the warehouse. So we have to find the local one, and this is the frustrating part, is that because we're going after basically local businesses trying to find somebody who can sell one of these things. Otherwise I have to get my backup, which is a Thermador, and the backup I can just get from Amazon or Lowe's or something. But um I have to actually call these places because none of them keep their inventory online, and none of them let you inquire about inventory online. So now I got to like use the phone and call people to find out if they have this thing and if it's available, and like that's just not what I needed in my life this week.
Yeah, that's horrible.
First world problems, but
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you should just rent something instead, but there's other.
well, it's a cooktop. It goes into the
Oh,
counter. Like yeah. So it sinks into the granite, and I gotta like take out the old one and like throw it away and put in the new one. It's a trivial like thing to do. It's not doesn't require any like technical savvy. Just make sure you turn off the gas before you do it. Uh,
there you
good
go.
safety
Yeah,
tip
that's key.
for you home improvers. All right, well, that's all the time we have for Zero Detraction. I forgot the name of our show for a second. But this is Zero Detraction. So thanks so much for listening. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe in whatever app you use to listen to this. It really helps us out. And leave a review, tell a friend, help us get Zero Detraction in the hands of more founders who are looking to launch and scale interesting companies. We are here to help. That's our purpose. We make no money off this podcast. We just do this because it's fun and we like to help people. Cameron, thanks so much for hanging out with me again.
Pleasure is mine. Always enjoy our conversation and hope we're creating value. And let us know if you have any ideas for future sessions. We'd love for you to engage and comment, and we want to see you on next week for our live session.
And with that, peace.
All right. Thank you.